Hello and thank you for joining us. My name is Mike Lee. I'm the founder of Goshen-house Ministries. I'd like to thank you for joining us on this video where we will be discussing our Passover Seder Haggadah that we have for sale on our website. Passover is the first of the 7 feasts of the Lord. And once you realize that these celebrations are all about Yeshua, it changes everything. So if you're interested in learning more about Passover or potentially even holding a Seder of your own, this resource is essential and it is for you. This resource is a 26-page booklet that will walk you through performing a Seder with Yeshua at the center of it all. And really my goal in putting this book together was to relive or recreate that Last Supper meal and to make these connections between the Old and the New Testaments. And as you walk through this meal, you will see how the story of the Exodus and also from the prophets and different places in the Old Testament, how these things are brought to life in light of Jesus, in light of Yeshua, and what he has done. You'll see that all throughout the Seder. In our video today, we're just going to cover a brief overview of what this book covers. We're not going to go over the details of how to do the Seder step by step. That's what this book is for. We just want to kind of give you an idea of what you will be receiving in the overall structure of the Seder as we have it outlined in this book. And you are free to change this in any way you like. If there's something you read and you kind of feel a little bit different about it, it's just a guide. But you can get this booklet and it'll walk you through step by step all the different parts of the Seder, again, keeping Yeshua at the center of it all. So before we start, we're going to first go over some of the essential items that you're going to need if you're going to be performing your own Seder. We're going to start off by having 2 candles that I will use to begin the service. Everybody that will participate is going to be needing a cup. We're going to be drinking 4 cups of juice or 4 cups of wine, depending upon your preference. You're going to need a Seder plate or a Seder tray. You can get some that are specifically for Passover with the different pictures of the different elements. I just have here a wooden tray, and you can arrange it based on the book or based on your liking. You're going to have what is called an afikomen bag or a linen towel used to wrap matzah. We're going to talk more about that later on. If you don't have a bag, that's fine. You can just use a linen towel to wrap it up for the service. You're going to have a bowl to wash hands, and you're going to have a towel to dry hands. So this booklet covers hand washing. If you desire to use foot washing instead, you can do that as well, but you're going to need a bowl and a towel for that. On the Seder tray itself, you're going to have different elements. You're going to have a green herb. We have here parsley as an example. You're going to have 3 smaller bowls. One's going to be for salt water. One's going to be for horseradish. The other one's going to be for what's called Charoset, which is similar to applesauce, but you can go online and find a recipe to make one to your liking. There's also going to be matzah on the tray that will be eaten throughout the meal. And there's also a roasted lamb bone or shank bone, which you can get from a local butcher shop. And you're also going to have juice or you're going to have wine to drink during this meal. This Passover Seder does not include an egg in the meal, which may surprise some people. But when I was putting this together and doing research, I found out that the egg was a more later on added tradition that more than likely was not implemented during the time of Yeshua during this meal. So I tried to do this book in a way where it was more authentic to the time of the apostles during that last meal he shared with his disciples before he offered up his life. So those are the elements that you will need for your meal, for your Passover Seder. Now let's get into the introduction of what this book actually covers. So in the opening pages of this booklet, we make very clear that we are setting a place at this table for the presence of the Lord. And when we do our Seders, we actually have a vacant seat that is set with the best plate, the best setting, everything, and it's set for the Lord's presence. In typical Seders, there will be a place set for Elijah. And Elijah is believed to be the prophet that will come during this Passover season to herald the coming of the Messiah, as John the Baptist's role was during Jesus' lifetime. So we set a place at this table, at our table, for the presence of the Lord, acknowledging his presence in this meal as we partake. As we begin the service, we light the candles, which ushers in the beginning of the meal we're going to do. And then we introduce 4 cups. The 4 cups get their origin from Exodus 6, verses 6 through 7. And in these verses, God states 4 things that he and only he alone can do, which he did for the Israelites, and he also did for us as believers in Messiah Yeshua. And here's what Exodus 6, verses 6 through 7 says. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from the bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So there are 4 things in those 2 verses that God said that he was going to do for the Israelites. And he said, I will bring them out. He said, I will rescue you. He said, I will redeem you, and I will take you as my people. So those 4 things are what those 4 different cups represent, which will be drank throughout the meal. And another thing in this book that is very important to understand, we're not just reproducing a a ceremony from the past that has no meaning to us today. The whole purpose of this is so we can make these connections to these feasts of the Lord and what it means to us today as believers. So in that same Exodus that we're talking about from the Israelites, there's also an Exodus that's mentioned in this booklet on the bottom of page 8, which I'm going to read because it's really important to understand the significance of what we're doing. And this is what it says. Jeremiah 23, 5-6 tells of a coming king that would establish as a new Moses that would conquer the oppressive powers governing God's people. These would be a greater Exodus that would result in all of God's people being reconciled to him, ending the exile from God's presence. As believers, we know this king to be Yeshua, the true Son of God. Yeshua taught us what it meant to truly follow God with our hearts. He proclaimed the beginning of God's kingdom on earth, performed miracles, and fulfilled the promises of God that were prophesied. On Passover, the lamb that was to be slain was a shadow of Yeshua, our spotless lamb, whose blood delivers us from the life of bondage that we were once enslaved to, birthing a new type of Passover, a greater Passover, just as Jeremiah 23, 5-6 says. So that's what it's all about. We're not just celebrating the Passover of thousands of years ago. We're celebrating the fact that we as people were under spiritual bondage. We were under the curse of Adam. And by the grace and grace alone of God, he was the one that brought us out and rescued us and redeemed us and took us as his people. So this is what we're celebrating. We're celebrating the greater Exodus, the fulfillment, which is what Yeshua offered in when he gave his life. So those are the 4 cups. We mentioned the cup of sanctification, cup of plagues, cup of redemption, and cup of restoration. Those are going to be drank throughout the meal. Now we're going to introduce the Seder elements. We talked about them as we introduced the necessary items we're going to need. But throughout the Seder, we actually go through each one, talk about its significance, not only in the time of Moses, but also in the time of us as believers today. We talk about how the parsley is a representation of Israel's initial flourishing in Egypt. We talk about how the salt water represents the tears that were shed in Egypt. Talk about how the matzah was the unleavened bread that was baked at Passover evening. Talk about the bitter herbs and how they represent the bitterness that was in slavery. Talk about the Charoset that represents the mortar that was used to make the bricks and the buildings in Egypt. And we also talk about the bone of the lamb that represents the Passover lamb that was slain that night. We talk about the individual elements. We talk about their importance back then and also what they mean to us today. And then with that, we're not going to go over again all those details, but I would like to just share 2 with you, 2 that are really significant. First of which is the bitter herbs. Bitter herbs is the horseradish mixture. And one thing that's pointed out in this book, because again, if you remember, we are walking through the Seder in the same way that Jesus would have with his disciples on that last night. And one thing we mentioned in this book possibly is John 13:26, which says, Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I shall give the piece of bread when I have dipped. Having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon." So we allude in this book to say that this part of the meal we're going through as we're eating these bitter herbs could have been the same moment that Jesus had Judas dip the bread into the bitter herbs and eat, representing the bitterness of slavery, also representing the bitterness of betrayal that he experienced by one of his inner 12 betraying him. So as we go through this meal, we're making these connections as we go through the Passover the same way that Jesus would have. The second one I want to talk about for the sake of this video is the matzah itself. So this is just a piece of matzah. It's a piece of unleavened bread. And one thing we talk about is how the unleavened bread is a picture of Yeshua. So when the matzah is introduced, we have each person look at the matzah and just observe its characteristics. We talk about how it's striped, talk about how it's pierced, and how it's unleavened, all of which describe the Messiah. We also have a portion here of Isaiah 53, which describes him as, by his stripes we're healed, and makes those connections as well. And then we also talk about this afikomen bag. And again, if you don't have one, it's okay. You can just use a regular piece of linen. But the way these bags are designed, they're really cool. They actually have in them 3 divisions. It's 1 pocket, and there are 3 pouches in here. And the way it's actually depicted in the book, where you have 1 piece of matzah in each pocket. And this is something that Jewish people do every year during their Passover. And they don't understand its fulfillment in Messiah. So this afikomen bag has 3 pieces of matzah in here. And during the meal, the middle one is taken out and it's broken, and half is put back in the bag into that middle portion, and the other half is wrapped in a linen and hidden away until later on in the meal. That's going to be hidden away. And later on, this comes back to the table after dinner, and this becomes the bread of communion, what we call communion today. And if you think about just the bigger picture, what that represents, to me, what it represents, where this bag is almost like it's a picture of heaven, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and Jesus, Messiah, Yeshua, comes down from heaven, is broken for us, and his body is wrapped in linen, is hidden away for a time, and it comes back as the bread of life, and that's the bread that we partake in communion. So it's a really awesome and powerful picture, because going through this meal, one of my goals was to really illustrate and to deepen our understanding of communion and where it comes from and what these different elements mean. So we talk about the matzah. We talk about all these different things as well, but those are probably the two most important ones that I just really wanted to communicate that are covered in this book. Very early on in the meal as well, we're going to have hand washing or foot washing. It's your preference. And you're going to have somebody going around your table or around your room with a bowl like this full of water and a towel, and very, very simply just rinsing their hands off in the bowl and wiping their hands in the same spirit that Jesus did when he had his towel girded on him and he washed the feet of his disciples. And that's mentioned in this book as well, why we're doing it and how Jesus did it as well. Later on, we cover the story of Passover itself. There are 4 different parts to that story. There are 4 designated readers in this book. So if you have 4 people going to participate, you can have one person each read the story of Passover. After that, there are 4 questions that children are going to ask. And the same way, you can have 4 children that are going to be designated readers to ask these questions. So the child asks the question, and the host will answer those questions through the meal as well. Once the 4 questions are answered and asked, we have a portion called Dayenu. Dayenu just means it would have been enough, and it's a song that's traditionally sung at Passover time. So that's in here, and there's words for the host, and there are odes for the participants as well. Once Dayenu is sung, and all of the Passover elements have been discussed and partaken of, and the 2 cups of juice or wine have been drank, then it's time for dinner. So there's a prayer offered in this book to introduce before we have the meal, and we have a great dinner. Everybody fellowships, has a great time. And then once dinner is complete, we come back to the Seder and we pick up where we left off. So once the meal is complete, we've already drank 2 cups of wine, and it's time for the afikomen to come back to the table, and it's time to introduce the 3rd cup of wine. And in this book, we explain how that 3rd cup, the cup of redemption, and how the afikomen that comes back to the table are the elements of what we know as and what we call communion today. And it's during this part of the meal, we actually go in detail what the Gospels say about that time when Jesus shared with them the new covenant and how these were symbolic of the new covenant coming in. And during this time of the meal, we actually take communion as a body. Of the entire portion of this Passover Seder, of this meal, this is probably the most important and the most holy time, because we are taking communion, but we're also taking it in truth and in spirit, the same way that Jesus would have during his Last Supper with his disciples. So once we discuss those and we partake in communion, there's one more cup to drink, the 4th cup. And this is a cup that's depicted in Luke 22:18, where Jesus said that he would not drink of the fruit of the vine anymore until he drinks it new with them in the coming kingdom. So this 4th cup represents that cup that he was actually speaking to in that last meal with his disciples as well. Once the 4th cup is completed, Mark 14:26 says that they sung a hymn and they left the meal. So there's a hymn that's provided in this book as well. And the lyrics of that hymn talks about the Passover, talks about the Exodus. Once we read that final hymn, we sing together. There's a final blessing that is given in the book from Numbers 6:24-26, where as a body, we all read this together and bless each other. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift his countenance up upon you and give you peace. So once we pray that final blessing over all of the attendants, we end the meal by saying, next year in Jerusalem. We all say it together. We say, next year in Jerusalem. And that is a traditional way to end the Seder as well. But what it alludes to is the prayer that next year we'll be able to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem, in the kingdom, because the Messiah will have already came back and he is there at the table with us. So it's just kind of like a prayer and a way to end that. And with that, that is the end of the Seder. Again, today's point was not to go over every single page in detail, but just kind of give you some of the major highlights of what's going to be covered and the overall structure of the Seder itself. These are available as single booklets. They're also available in packs of 5. That way, if you have a larger meal and you have more people that are attending and you like to have their own book to read or something to take home with them, that way you're not passing around a book around the whole table. That's an option as well. If you'd like to have larger quantities, feel free to contact us and we can work out a deal with you to get you the best price depending upon what your needs are. So if you have any questions, any concerns, anything like that, feel free to email us at Goshen-house@outlook.com. Let us know, and we look forward to hearing from you guys. We pray that this resource can be a blessing to you, to your family, to your churches. And with that, I thank you again for tuning into this video. Take care. God bless you guys, and we'll see you on the next one.